The drumming of rain against the vast floor-to-ceiling windows was a somber metronome, counting down the seconds of her son's life. From the shadowed alcove of his office, Eleanor Martinez watched him, a silhouette against the bruised twilight of the Chicago skyline. He wasn't her son, not anymore. He was a king ruling over a sterile kingdom of glass and steel, his heart encased in ice. A junior executive, a young man with earnest eyes and a slightly trembling hand, stood before Ethan's desk, stammering an apology for a minor oversight in a quarterly report. Eleanor felt a familiar ache bloom in her chest, a cold dread that had become her constant companion. This was the empire she had built for him, but it had consumed him whole. Ethan didn't raise his voice. He never did. His words were quiet, precise, and utterly devoid of emotion, each one a perfectly sharpened shard of ice. He spoke of unacceptable margins of error, of the standards expected at Martinez Global Industries, of professional consequences. The young man's face paled, his burgeoning career withering under the Arctic frost of Ethan's disappointment. Eleanor saw the ghost of her late husband in Ethan's posture, the same unyielding strength, but she also saw a terrifying emptiness that had never been there before. Her husband had passion, a fire that drove him. Ethan was just a hollow echo, a beautifully crafted shell that contained only indifference. The executive was dismissed with a chillingly polite nod, his future uncertain, as the office door clicked shut. Leaving them alone, the silence that fell was heavier than any argument. Eleanor stepped out of the shadows, her tailored silk blouse making no sound. She studied her son, his handsome face a mask of cool control, his eyes fixed on the city lights below as if they held more interest than the human being he had just dismantled. She remembered a boy who laughed so hard he cried, who finger-painted masterpieces on her office walls, whose heart was a bright, boundless thing. That boy was gone, buried under years of betrayal and the crushing weight of a legacy he never seemed to want, but carried with brutal efficiency. He was a perfect CEO and a broken man. Her mind replayed the moment it all shattered. His ex-fiancée, a woman curated from the finest stock of high society, had betrayed him in the most public and humiliating way. She had seen him not as a man to love, but as a prize to be won, a key to a kingdom. When she was done, she had gutted him, taking not just his trust, but his very ability to feel. In the aftermath, Eleanor had tried to fix it the only way she knew how. She had paraded a line of perfectly suitable, impeccably bred women before him. Each one was a portrait of grace and ambition, but to Ethan they were all just ghosts of his betrayer, their smiles practiced, their motives transparent. A fierce, desperate resolve began to harden within her. The boardrooms, the market shifts, the billion-dollar acquisitions, she could command them all with a single, decisive word. She could shape the future of global technology from her penthouse office, a veritable goddess of industry whose name was whispered with reverence and fear. Yet she was utterly, devastatingly powerless to mend her own son's heart. She had given him the world, but in doing so, she had failed to protect him from it. The guilt was a physical weight, a stone she carried deep within her soul, a constant reminder of her most profound failure. This opulent cage was of her own making. That evening, as the rain continued its relentless assault on the city, a plan began to form. It was radical, it was insane, it was beneath a woman of her station. But she was not a CEO in that moment. She was a mother, and a mother's love knows no bounds, no rules, no dignities it will not sacrifice. If the world of wealth and power could not offer a balm for his soul, she would search for it in the world he never saw, the one that existed in the periphery, in the quiet corridors and unseen corners of his own building. She would find someone who saw a man, not a name, someone whose hands were not grasping for a crown. The next few days were a blur of clandestine phone calls and discreet arrangements. She contacted a former head of security, a man whose loyalty was absolute and whose discretion was legendary. A new identity was forged. Ellie, a widow seeking quiet, simple work, with a fabricated history of cleaning jobs in modest establishments. Her immaculate designer suits were replaced with a simple gray uniform. Her manicured nails were cut short, and her silver hair, usually coiffed to perfection, was pulled back into a severe, unassuming bun. Looking at her reflection, she saw a stranger, a woman stripped of all her power, all her prestige. She looked ordinary. She looked invisible. On her first day, she walked through the soaring marble lobby of the Martinez Global Tower not as its queen, but as a ghost. The security guards, men she had personally approved for hire, gave her a cursory glance and a nod, their eyes sliding past her without a flicker of recognition. It was a dizzying, humbling experience. The air she breathed was the same. The art on the walls was from her private collection. The very foundation of the building was a testament to her life's work. Yet she was an outsider, a nobody, and in this anonymity she found a strange, terrifying freedom. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. She was assigned to the executive floor, her son's floor. The irony was so thick she could taste it. Her domain. Now she would be polishing its surfaces, emptying its trash bins, and observing its inhabitants from the lowest possible rung of the ladder. Her supervisor, a stern woman named Martha, handed her a cart with bottles of chemicals and soft cloths, the tools of her new trade. Martha's instructions were clipped and efficient, her gaze dismissive. Eleanor, the woman who had negotiated multi-billion-dollar mergers, nodded meekly and listened intently to instructions on how to properly clean granite countertops without leaving streaks. The absurdity of it all was almost overwhelming. With her cart in tow, she pushed it down the silent, carpeted hallway, the wheels making a soft whirring sound. Each step was a plunge into the unknown. This was not a boardroom strategy. There were no predictable outcomes or calculated risks. This was an act of pure, unadulterated faith, a mother's desperate prayer. She was searching for a flicker of warmth in this world of cold ambition, a single, genuine soul who could see past the fortress of wealth and find the lost boy hidden inside. Her entire being screamed that this was madness. But as she stopped, outside the first office, she took a deep breath, her knuckles white as she gripped the handle of her cart. The mission had begun. The first week was a lesson in humility, a masterclass in the art of being invisible. Eleanor, now solely Ellie, learned the geography of the executive floor not by its corner offices, but by its scuff marks and coffee stains. Her hands, once accustomed to the smooth weight of a Mont Blanc pen and the rustle of important documents, grew rough from abrasive cleaners and hot water. She learned that people rarely look at the person emptying their trash. Their eyes slide right through you, as if you are a part of the furniture, a ghost in a gray uniform. She saw ambition, raw and undisguised, in the tense shoulders of junior partners, and a weary resignation in the eyes of long-serving assistants. It was a world she had built, but had never truly seen. Amidst the sea of self-important strides and hushed, urgent phone calls, there was one person who moved to a different rhythm. Her name was Chloe Baker. Eleanor first noticed her not for any grand gesture but for the quiet details. Chloe hummed while she polished the brass fixtures on the elevator doors, a soft, tuneless melody that was somehow defiant in the oppressive silence of the corridor. She didn't just clean, she cared. She would straighten a crooked picture frame, water a wilting plant on a windowsill, and move with a gentle grace that seemed entirely out of place in this high-stakes environment. Eleanor found herself watching the young woman, intrigued by her serene detachment from the corporate chaos surrounding them. One afternoon, Eleanor witnessed the small act that would solidify her focus. A young receptionist, clearly overwhelmed, had her head in her hands, the lights on her switchboard blinking like a frantic, unanswered plea. Later, after the tide of calls had subsided, Eleanor saw Chloe approach the desk. She didn't say much, simply placed a fresh cup of tea on the desk, and then as she turned to leave, stuck a small yellow sticky note to the woman's computer monitor. From a distance, Eleanor couldn't see what was on it, but she saw the receptionist's exhausted face crack into a genuine, watery smile as she looked at the note. It was a moment of pure, unrewarded kindness. Curiosity gnawing at her, Eleanor found an excuse to wipe down a nearby table, allowing her to catch a glimpse of the small note. It wasn't a message with words. It was a simple, exquisitely rendered drawing of a small, smiling sunflower. It was a tiny piece of art, a beacon of light left in the middle of a stressful afternoon. In that moment, Eleanor understood. Chloe didn't just see tasks to be completed. She saw people who were hurting. She possessed an innate empathy, a quality so rare in these halls it felt like a superpower. This was the light Eleanor had been searching for. The warmth she prayed could melt the frost around her son's heart. The plan formed, a risky piece of choreography she would have to execute perfectly. She knew Ethan left the office at precisely 6 o'clock every evening. His routine as rigid and unyielding as he was. She timed it carefully, watching the clock on the wall, her heart beginning a slow, heavy drum against her ribs. She filled a small tray with several heavy ceramic mugs, ostensibly to take them to the kitchenette for washing. Her hands felt clumsy, her nerves frayed. Everything depended on the next few moments, on a believable accident and an authentic reaction. She felt the absurdity of her position, a titan of industry about to stage a fall like a character in a vaudeville play. As the elevator doors chimed, signaling Ethan's approach, Eleanor took a deep breath and stepped into his path. She feigned a stumble, letting the tray slip from her grasp with a theatrical gasp. The mugs hit the marble floor with a deafening crash, shattering into 100 white fragments, dark coffee splashing across the pristine floor like a violent wound. She landed on her knees, careful to seem frail, embarrassed and flustered. From the corner of her eye, she saw Ethan stop. He looked down at the mess, his face an unreadable mask of cold annoyance. For a terrifying second, she thought he would just step around her and continue on his way. But then, another figure rushed into the scene. It was Chloe, her own cleaning cart abandoned down the hall. She didn't spare a glance for the CEO standing there, her focus entirely on the kneeling Ellie. "Are you all right? Did you get cut?" she asked, her voice laced with genuine concern. She was already crouching down, carefully picking up the larger shards of ceramic, her nimble fingers navigating the sharp edges. She looked up at Eleanor, her warm, expressive eyes full of kindness, completely unaware that she was kneeling at the feet of the two most powerful people in the entire corporation. Her lack of deference was breathtaking. Only after assuring herself that Ellie was unharmed did Chloe seem to notice the imposing figure of Ethan. She looked up at him, at his tense jaw, and the deep furrow in his brow. She didn't cower or flatter. She simply saw a man who looked as strained as the receptionist from earlier. A small, knowing smile touched her lips as she continued to gather the broken pieces. "Tough day?" she asked, her voice soft yet carrying an incredible weight of understanding. Her gaze was direct, meeting his without an ounce of fear. He was just another person to her, another soul weathering a storm. Ethan was visibly taken aback. He was accustomed to two reactions from his employees: fawning sycophancy or terrified silence. This quiet, unassuming cleaner had offered him neither. She had offered him a moment of simple, human connection. He didn't reply, but the ice in his eyes thawed for just a fraction of a second, replaced by a flicker of stunned surprise. He seemed momentarily lost, unsure how to react to a gesture that asked for nothing and offered only empathy. It was a crack in the armor, so small it was almost imperceptible. But Eleanor saw it. She saw it, and her heart swelled with a fierce, soaring hope. As Chloe finished helping her clean the last of the mess, wishing her a good night before heading back to her work, Eleanor watched her son. He remained standing there for a long moment after the elevator doors had opened and closed for him, his gaze fixed on the spot where the mugs had shattered. He was intrigued, puzzled. The simple, honest words of a cleaner had pierced through, a wall that a legion of society's finest had failed to even scratch. Kneeling on the cold marble floor, her uniform stained with coffee, Eleanor Martinez felt a profound sense of triumph. The spark had been found. Now she had to pray it would become a fire. The memory of the shattered mugs became a strange fixture in Ethan's mind. It wasn't the mess or the disruption. It was her eyes, clear and direct, and her simple, guileless question. "Tough day?" The words echoed in the silent expanse of his penthouse, a stark contrast to the sycophantic murmurings he usually endured. People approached him with agendas, with carefully constructed sentences designed to impress or extract. This woman, this cleaner, had simply seen him. She hadn't seen a CEO, a billionaire, or a target of opportunity. She had seen a man having a hard day, and it was this simple, unvarnished humanity that had breached a defense he thought was impenetrable. He started to notice her. Before, the cleaning staff had been a faceless, functional part of the building's machinery, as inanimate as the polished steel and marble. Now, he found his eyes searching for her. He saw her leaving a small, wrapped cookie on the desk of a security guard who worked the late shift. He overheard her complimenting a nervous mailroom clerk on his new tie. Her kindness was a quiet, constant currency she distributed freely to those who were usually invisible. He began to alter his schedule by minutes, leaving his office a little earlier or taking a detour for water, hoping for a chance intersection in the long, silent hallways. Meanwhile, Eleanor, in her guise as Ellie, was discovering that her carefully constructed plan had a significant, unforeseen complication. She was growing to genuinely love Chloe. During shared 10-minute breaks in the sterile staff room, Chloe would talk about her life, not as a complaint, but as a simple statement of fact. She spoke of her grandmother's laugh, the smell of turpentine in her small apartment studio, and her dream of one day painting a mural that would make people stop and feel something, just for a moment. She was a torrent of life and hope and resilience, and Eleanor found herself captivated, seeing in Chloe the daughter she never had. The guilt was a corrosive acid, eating away at the foundations of her resolve. Every time Chloe offered her half of a sandwich or asked about her day with sincere interest, Eleanor felt like a fraud. She was nurturing a beautiful, budding flower under false pretenses, a lie that could poison the very soil it grew in. One afternoon, Chloe showed her a picture, on her phone, a stunning charcoal sketch of an elderly man's hands, weathered and worn but gentle. "My grandfather's," Chloe had said softly. "I try to capture not just what people look like, but what they've lived." Eleanor had to turn away, a lump forming in her throat, feeling the profound weight of her deception. Ethan finally broke his silence. One evening, he saw Chloe struggling to balance a large, overflowing trash receptacle while trying to open a service door. He didn't just walk past. He stopped, took the heavy bag from her, and held the door open. "Let me help you with that," he said, his voice sounding rusty from disuse in this gentle register. Chloe's surprise was evident, but it melted quickly into one of her radiant smiles. "Thank you, Mr. Martinez. I had it, but I appreciate it." He was just Mr. Martinez, not Ethan, not the prize to be won. The small professional distance she maintained was more alluring than any overt flirtation he had ever encountered. These small moments began to accumulate, becoming the highlight of Eleanor's clandestine observations. A shared glance in a hallway, a brief exchange about the weather. Each one was a tiny victory, a testament to Chloe's disarming nature. Ethan began to look less like a ghost and more like a man. A subtle warmth was returning to his eyes, a hint of the boy she remembered. Eleanor's heart ached with a mixture of triumphant joy and agonizing fear. Her plan was working. Her son was slowly, cautiously, coming back to life. But she knew that the truth, when it inevitably came out, could destroy it all in an instant. But they were not the only ones observing these subtle changes. Veronica Sterling, a senior executive in the marketing department, had been watching Ethan for months. She was a woman carved from ambition, with a sharp mind and an even sharper smile. She had considered herself the front-runner in the unofficial race for the CEO's attention, attending the right galas, laughing at the right jokes, and presenting flawless reports. She had made it her personal mission to become the next Mrs. Martinez, and she was methodical in her pursuit. Ethan's polite but consistent coolness had been a challenge, but one she was confident she could overcome. Recently, however, she had noticed a shift. It wasn't just his coolness, it was a new, frustrating preoccupation. Then she saw it herself. She was walking past the executive lounge when she saw Ethan pouring a coffee. The cleaner, the one with the annoyingly serene face, was inside, wiping down a table. Ethan said something to her, something quiet that Veronica couldn't hear, but she saw him smile. It wasn't his polite corporate smile. It was a small, genuine, almost unconscious upturn of his lips. It was a smile Veronica had been trying to elicit for a year, and he was giving it away for free to the hired help. Cold, venomous jealousy coiled in Veronica's gut. It was insulting. It was inexplicable. What could a billionaire CEO possibly have to say to a woman in a cleaner's uniform? The interaction was a puzzle that didn't fit into her understanding of the world, where power and status were the only things that mattered. She watched as Chloe left the lounge, and Ethan's gaze followed her for a moment too long. Veronica's mind began to race, suspicion taking root where ambition had once flourished. This made no sense, and things that made no sense were a threat. From that moment on, Veronica began to watch them both. She noted every brief conversation, every shared glance. She also took note of the new, older cleaner, Ellie, who often seemed to be nearby. Her sharp analytical mind, usually reserved for market demographics and brand strategy, was now focused on a new project. She saw a pattern, A strange affinity between the CEO and the service staff that felt orchestrated. Who was this girl? Chloe? And who was the old woman who watched everything with such quiet intensity? Veronica retreated to her office, the seed of a dark idea beginning to sprout. She would find out, and she would tear it all down. The interactions between Ethan and Chloe began to evolve from fleeting moments into something more intentional. One evening, Ethan found her not in the hallways, but in a small, forgotten rooftop atrium meant for employees. A space most had long since ignored. She wasn't cleaning. She was sitting on a stone bench, a small sketchbook open on her lap, her charcoal-smudged fingers moving with a focused intensity. The city lights were just beginning to prick the deep violet sky, and in their glow he saw her true self for the first time, the artist. He stood there for a moment silent, watching her create a world on paper. He approached quietly, not wanting to startle her, but she sensed his presence and looked up. There was no fear in her eyes, only a mild surprise that quickly softened into a welcome. He asked what she was drawing and she showed him. It was the skyline, but not the cold architectural version he saw from his office window. Her drawing was alive, imbued with a sense of lonely beauty and resilient hope. She spoke about light, about how even the darkest shadows are defined by the light they touch. He found himself speaking too, telling her about the pressures of his role, the feeling of being a figurehead rather than a person, a confession he had never articulated to anyone. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a sense of peace settle over him. Talking to Chloe was like breathing fresh air after being trapped in a stale, pressurized room. She listened without judgment, her gaze thoughtful and understanding. She didn't offer solutions or platitudes. She simply offered him the space to be vulnerable. As their conversation ended and he walked away, he realized the attraction he felt wasn't just intrigue. It was a profound, magnetic pull towards her authenticity, her light. He was beginning to fall for her, and the thought was both exhilarating and utterly terrifying, dredging up the ghosts of his past. From her vantage point, down the hall pretending to wipe down a glass partition, Eleanor watched the entire exchange. Every quiet word, every shared smile was a dagger in her heart, half of it gleaming with success, the other half dripping with the poison of her deceit. This was everything she had hoped for, a genuine connection forming in the most unlikely of circumstances. Her son was smiling again, a real smile that reached the deepest corners of his eyes. But the foundation of this beautiful, fragile structure was her lie. She was not a benevolent Cupid. She was a manipulator, and the fear of the inevitable collapse was beginning to consume her. Her bond with Chloe deepened into a real friendship. They would share stories, and Chloe, ever open, confided in her about the financial strain of her grandmother's care, the constant worry that gnawed at her. But, Chloe had said, looking at Ellie with her impossibly bright eyes, it's a privilege to care for someone you love, isn't it? It's the hard things that show you what you're made of. The words, meant to be comforting, were a fresh wound. For Eleanor, she wanted to confess everything, to pull Chloe into her arms and tell her she would take care of everything, that she was not just Ellie, the cleaner, but a woman who could solve all her problems with a single phone call. One day, the impulse became overwhelming. As Chloe spoke of a new experimental treatment for her grandmother that was financially impossible, Eleanor opened her mouth to speak the truth. The words, "I can help," were right there, hovering on her tongue. But she saw the pride and integrity in Chloe's face. Revealing herself now would destroy everything. Chloe would feel used, a project, a pawn in a billionaire's game. Ethan would see it as the ultimate betrayal, proof that every connection is transactional. She swallowed the words, the lie a bitter pill in her throat, and instead offered a comforting hand on Chloe's arm, a gesture that felt woefully, shamefully inadequate. While this emotional drama unfolded in atriums and break rooms, Veronica Sterling was in her sleek, minimalist office, engaged in a far colder pursuit. Her initial jealousy had sharpened into a focused, methodical investigation. She started with Chloe Baker. A few discreet inquiries with a contact in human resources yielded Chloe's employee file. It was all there: the stellar academic record, the art scholarship to one of the country's most prestigious schools, the abrupt withdrawal citing family reasons. It was a plausible story, but to Veronica it felt incomplete. Why this job? Why here? It was too convenient. Her next target was the old woman, Ellie. Veronica's contact in HR searched the database for her file, but the results were strange. The file for Eleanor Peretti, the fake name they had used, was thin, almost a shell. It listed a social security number and a sparse work history, but it lacked the usual depth. It had been created and fast-tracked with a high-level security clearance override, a detail that made Veronica's blood run cold. This wasn't some random old woman. This was a ghost, deliberately planted inside the system. The pieces were beginning to connect in a way that pointed to a conspiracy. Veronica leaned back in her leather chair, her fingers steepled, her mind alight with cold fire. The CEO's sudden interest in a cleaner with a brilliant past who had abandoned it, and a mysterious old woman with a ghost file who always seemed to be watching. It was a setup. It had to be. Her mind immediately leaped to the most logical and most damning conclusion. The girl was a plant, a sophisticated gold digger, and the old woman was her accomplice. They were playing a long game, trying to trap the billionaire. A cruel, triumphant smile spread across Veronica's face. She now had a purpose, a mission. She would not just watch anymore. She would act. She would gather evidence. She would document every meeting, every conversation. She would uncover this sordid little plot piece by piece, and when the time was right, she would expose it. She wouldn't just save Ethan from a pair of conniving charlatans. She would be the hero of the story, the one who saw the truth. And in doing so, she would finally definitively win the prize. Her ambition, momentarily thwarted, came roaring back, now fueled by the intoxicating promise of vengeance and victory. If this story touched you, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments where you're listening to this story from. Your support is what motivates us to keep bringing you romances that warm the heart. The rooftop atrium became their sanctuary, a secret garden suspended between the indifferent stars and the relentless city. Their meetings grew more frequent, evolving into an unspoken ritual. Ethan found himself living for those stolen moments, the quiet conversations that felt more real than any boardroom negotiation. He brought her a thermos of hot tea one chilly evening, a simple gesture that felt monumental. Chloe, in turn, showed him her art, explaining the emotional landscape of her charcoal lines. She was teaching him to see the world not as a series of assets and liabilities, but as a tapestry of stories, of light and shadow. His interactions at work began to change, a subtle but profound shift that did not go unnoticed. He revisited the case of the junior executive he had so coldly dismissed in front of his mother. After reviewing the young man's file and seeing a history of dedicated work, Ethan called him into his office. Instead of termination, he offered mentorship, a chance to learn from the mistake. He spoke of his own past errors, a moment of stunning vulnerability that left the executive speechless. He was rediscovering the empathy Chloe had shown him, learning to wield his power not as a weapon but as a tool to build, to mend. One rain-swept evening on the rooftop, the air thick with the smell of wet concrete and distant storms, the space between them finally dissolved. They were talking about fear, Chloe's fear of her grandmother's fading memory, Ethan's fear of trusting someone again. He looked at her, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the city, her eyes holding a universe of compassion. He saw no agenda, no hidden motive, only a woman of incredible strength and gentleness. The ghosts of his past seemed to shrink in her presence, their whispers silenced by the steady beat of his own heart. He leaned in, his movement hesitant, questioning. Chloe met him halfway, a silent affirmation. Their first kiss was not a passionate explosion, but a quiet discovery. It was gentle, tentative, and deeply reverent, a promise of healing. It was the feeling of coming home after a long and bitter exile. In that single moment, under the watchful gaze of the skyline, Ethan's icy fortress melted, and he allowed himself for the first time in years to truly feel. He was not a Martinez. He was not a CEO. He was just a man, flawed and wounded, who had found an anchor in a world that had tried to drown him. It felt like a beginning. Eleanor, watching from the shadows of a service corridor door she'd propped open, felt tears streaming down her face. A silent, wrenching sob caught in her throat. This perfect, beautiful moment was her greatest success and her most terrible crime. She had brought them together, but she had done so with a lie that was now an inseparable part of their story. The joy she saw on her son's face was real, but it was built on a foundation of sand. She was trapped in a gilded cage of her own, making forced to watch the people she loved most walk toward a precipice she herself had created. Sleep offered her no escape. Her nights were plagued by nightmares where she would see Chloe's trusting smile turn to horror, and Ethan's newfound warmth freeze back into an eternal winter. The gray cleaner's uniform felt like a prison sentence she had imposed upon herself. The weight of the deception was crushing her spirit, making every shared smile with Chloe, every hopeful glance from her son, feel like another turn of the screw. She knew she had to confess, but how? How could she detonate a bomb and expect the shrapnel not to tear apart the very people she was trying to save? Her powerlessness was absolute. Meanwhile, Veronica's conviction had solidified into cold, hard action. She was no longer content to simply observe. Using a significant portion of her personal savings, she hired a discreet but ruthless private investigator, a man who specialized in uncovering the hidden lives of the city's elite. His first target was Chloe Baker. He was to follow her, document her every move outside the hallowed halls of Martinez Global. Veronica wanted to know everything: where she lived, who she saw, and most importantly, where her money came from. She was hunting for the linchpin that would prove the entire affair was a financial transaction. The investigators' reports were delivered daily in a plain manila envelope. They were thorough, filled with grainy photographs and detailed timelines. They showed Chloe's life in stark detail: the small rundown apartment building in a working-class neighborhood, the trips to a local clinic to visit her ailing grandmother, the long hours she spent working a second job as a waitress on weekends. For any normal person, the photos would paint a picture of a devoted, hardworking young woman sacrificing for her family. But Veronica looked at them and saw only one thing: motive. The girl was desperate, a perfect candidate for a honey trap scheme. Next, the investigator turned his attention to Ellie. His search for Eleanor Peretti yielded nothing. The address on her file was a mail drop. There were no credit cards, no driver's license, no digital footprint. It was as if the woman didn't exist before she started working at the company. The investigator reported that it was a professionally crafted ghost identity, the kind used in deep cover operations or sophisticated fraud. This was the confirmation Veronica needed. It was an airtight case in her mind: a desperate girl, a ghost accomplice, and a billionaire target. It was a story as old as time. Veronica compiled the evidence into a pristine leather-bound folder: the photographs of Chloe's impoverished life, the investigator's report on Ellie's non-existence, and her own log of the suspiciously frequent meetings between Chloe and Ethan. She felt a surge of adrenaline, the thrill of a predator closing in on its prey. She wasn't just exposing a lie anymore. She was crafting a narrative, a weapon. All she needed was the perfect moment, the perfect stage, to deploy it for maximum impact. A moment so public and so humiliating that Ethan would have no choice but to see the truth and turn to the one person who had saved him: her. The love between Ethan and Chloe blossomed in their secret rooftop world, a fragile but vibrant ecosystem thriving in the harsh climate of the corporate tower. He finally told her everything about his past, the story of his ex-fiance's betrayal, spilling out of him not as a tale of anger, but as a quiet, sorrowful confession. He spoke of the public humiliation, the feeling of being a pawn in a game of status, and the profound loneliness that followed. He laid the fractured pieces of his heart at her feet, an act of trust so complete it terrified him. He was offering her the power to destroy him, just as another had done before. Chloe listened, her hand resting gently on his, her presence a steady, unwavering anchor in the storm of his memory. She didn't offer empty platitudes or scorn for his former love. Instead, she spoke of scars, how they don't mean you are broken, but that you have survived something that tried to break you. "She didn't see you, Ethan," Chloe said, her voice soft but firm. "She saw a prize. I see you." In that moment, surrounded by the sleeping city, he knew he was irrevocably in love. The words came to him, simple and true. "I love you, Chloe," he whispered, the admission both a surrender and a victory. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as a smile of pure, unadulterated joy spread across her face. "I love you too," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. The words settled between them, real and solid, chasing away the last of the ghosts. They talked for hours, making plans for a future that suddenly seemed not only possible but inevitable. They would travel, she would paint, he would learn to live again, not just to work. For the first time, Ethan felt the crushing weight of his legacy transform into a sense of opportunity, a tool he could use to build a life of meaning with her. Eleanor heard it all, hidden once again in the service corridor. She had heard their declarations of love, and the sound was like shattered glass in her soul. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever witnessed, and it was her death sentence. The lie was no longer a well-intentioned deception. It was a sacrilege, a desecration of something pure and true. How could she ever look either of them in the eye again? She stumbled away from the door, her hand pressed against her mouth to stifle a sob, the weight of her guilt so immense she felt it might physically crush her. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she could not let this continue for another day. Veronica's suspicious glances in the hallways had become more frequent, her smile sharper, colder. It was only a matter of time before she uncovered something. Eleanor had to be the one to tell them. She had to be the one to explain, to beg for their forgiveness even if she didn't deserve it. She resolved with a heart made of lead that she would do it tonight. She would go to Ethan's penthouse after her shift, still in her uniform, and confess everything. It was a terrifying prospect, but the alternative, letting them be blindsided by a malicious outsider, was unthinkable. Veronica, however, was already several steps ahead, her own plans moving with the chilling precision of a master strategist. She had identified the perfect stage for her revelation. In 2 days, Martinez Global was scheduled to host its largest press conference of the year to announce a revolutionary new technology. The event would be live-streamed globally. The world's media, industry titans, and key investors would all be in attendance. It was a moment designed to project strength and confidence. Veronica saw it as the perfect stage to orchestrate a drama of weakness, betrayal, and humiliation. She worked tirelessly, her focus absolute. She prepared a small encrypted USB drive, a digital dagger she would wield at the opportune moment. On it was a simple but devastating presentation. It included the grainy surveillance photos of Chloe's modest apartment and the clinic where her grandmother stayed, annotated with captions suggesting a desperate financial motive. It had the investigators' damning report on Ellie's non-existent identity, highlighting the high-level security override. The centerpiece, however, was a single, shocking image she had paid the investigator a handsome bonus to acquire. It was a photograph taken from a distance of Eleanor Martinez, the real Eleanor Martinez, getting out of her chauffeured Rolls-Royce a few blocks from the office tower, carrying a duffel bag. A second photo showed her emerging minutes later from a nearby building, transformed into the drab gray figure of Ellie. It was undeniable proof. The matriarch of Martinez Global, one of the most powerful women in the world, was masquerading as a cleaner. Placed side by side with a photo of Chloe, the narrative was clear, simple, and utterly ruinous. A desperate girl and a scheming mother in a conspiracy to entrap a billionaire. Veronica rehearsed her speech in the privacy of her office, her voice calm and filled with feigned concern. She would frame herself as a loyal executive, forced to take drastic measures to protect the company's CEO from a sophisticated and predatory scheme. She would be the hero, the savior. She felt no remorse, only a cold, exhilarating sense of impending victory. She had been overlooked and underestimated, but now she would be the one to hold all the power, to control the entire narrative. The truth didn't matter. The version of the truth that everyone believed was the only thing that counted. Eleanor steeled herself to go to her son that night and confess. A building-wide memo was sent to all staff. Due to a critical last-minute development, the press conference had been moved up. It was no longer in 2 days. It was now scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. A wave of ice-cold dread washed over Eleanor. She read the email again, her blood turning to slush in her veins. Her window of opportunity, the small chance she had to control the fallout, had just vanished. She had run out of time. The storm was no longer on the horizon. It was here. The day of the press conference arrived with an atmosphere of electric anticipation. The auditorium was a sea of dark suits and flashing cameras, the air humming with the murmur of 100 conversations. On stage, under the glare of the bright lights, Ethan stood at the podium, a man transformed. He was no longer the icy, detached CEO. He spoke with passion and vision about the company's new direction, his voice resonating with a confidence that was born not of arrogance but of a newfound sense of purpose. In the back of the room, Chloe watched from a staff-only section, her heart swelling with pride. Her presence a secret Eleanor had arranged. It was meant to be a moment of shared triumph. Then, just as Ethan was about to unveil the new product, a calm, clear voice cut through the auditorium. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Ethan, but there is a more pressing matter the company and its shareholders need to be made aware of." Veronica Sterling walked onto the stage, her expression a mask of grave concern. A stunned silence fell over the room. Before anyone could react, the massive screen behind Ethan, which was meant to display the new product, flickered and changed. An image appeared. A grainy photograph of Chloe, standing outside her modest apartment building, looking weary but resolute. "This is Chloe Baker," Veronica announced, her voice amplified by the microphone she had calmly taken from a nearby stand. "An aspiring artist who gave up a prestigious scholarship, now working as a cleaner on our executive floor." The image changed, showing a report on her family's mounting medical debts. A woman with significant financial pressures. Ethan stared at the screen, his mind reeling with confusion, a cold knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He looked at Veronica, then back at the screen, trying to understand the assault that was unfolding before his very eyes. This felt horribly, terrifyingly familiar. Veronica's voice was smooth as silk and sharp as a razor. "One might wonder how a woman in her position captured the personal attention of our CEO. Perhaps she had help." A new image flashed onto the screen, and a collective gasp rippled through the audience. It was the photo of Eleanor Martinez stepping out of her Rolls-Royce, juxtaposed with another of her as Ellie, the cleaner. The final image was a triptych: Chloe looking innocent, Ellie looking unassuming, and a bold red line connecting them both. Or perhaps it was a carefully orchestrated plot, executed by a desperate girl and a manipulative mother. The accusation hung in the air, a poisonous, glittering thing. A gold-digging accomplice in a matriarch's insane scheme to trap her own son. The words struck Ethan with the force of a physical blow. He looked from the screen to Veronica's triumphant, pitying face, and everything inside him shattered. The trust he had so carefully rebuilt, the vulnerability he had dared to show, it all turned to ash in his mouth. He saw Chloe, not as the woman he loved, but as another actress in another play. And his mother, his own mother, was the director. The betrayal was so absolute, so profound. It stole the air from his lungs. In the back of the room, Chloe stood frozen, the blood draining from her face. The world had tilted on its axis. Ellie, her kind, gentle friend, was Eleanor Martinez? The public accusation, the faces of the reporters turning towards her, their cameras like the muzzles of a firing squad, was a dizzying nightmare. She felt the weight of 1,000 stares, the whispers like the hiss of snakes. She wasn't just heartbroken, she was annihilated. Her character, her integrity, her love, all publicly dissected and labeled as a cheap commodity. She turned and fled, pushing through the doors, her only thought to escape the suffocating horror of it all. Eleanor, who had been standing near Chloe, watched the scene unfold, paralyzed by a despair so total it was like a physical shroud. This was her fault, all of it. She had watched Veronica's perfectly executed character assassination, had seen the light in her son's eyes extinguish and be replaced by a familiar, terrifying winter. She saw Chloe's devastation as she ran from the room, and the sight broke what was left of her heart. She had gambled with the two people she loved most in the world, and in a single cataclysmic moment, she had lost everything. The silence in the auditorium was her judgment. Ethan did not say a word. He didn't look at Veronica. He didn't look at the audience. With a face carved from stone, he turned and walked off the stage, disappearing through a side exit, leaving behind the wreckage of the press conference and the ruins of his life. The icy fortress he had spent years building had been shattered by Chloe's warmth, and now in its place he built a wall of pure, unbreachable permafrost. The hurt was too deep, the betrayal too complete. He retreated into himself, colder and more wounded than he had ever been before. He went to the one place he knew, his penthouse, the gilded cage. He stood before the vast window, the rain beginning to fall again, mirroring the storm inside him. The city lights, which had so recently seemed full of promise, were now just cold, distant, and meaningless. He had been a fool. He had allowed himself to believe, to hope, to feel. He had let his guard down for two people, the woman he loved and the mother he respected, and they had conspired to make a mockery of him. The pain was a living entity, clawing at his insides, leaving him hollow. Eleanor found him there an hour later, standing motionless, a ghost in his own home. The atmosphere was thick with a silence that screamed with accusation and despair. She had come to explain, to confess, to beg, but looking at his back, at the rigid set of his shoulders, she knew that words were a pathetic, inadequate tool against a wound this deep. He was gone, retreated to a place so far inside himself she feared no one, least of all her, could ever reach him again. Her desperate plan had not just failed to heal him, it had inflicted a mortal wound. Eleanor approached her son, her steps heavy, the vast penthouse feeling like a cold, empty tomb. His silence was a wall, but it was a wall she had to break down or die trying. Tears streamed unchecked down her face, stripping away the last vestiges of the powerful matriarch, leaving only a terrified, heartbroken mother. "Ethan," she began, her voice a raw, broken whisper. I know there is nothing I can say to fix this, but I need you to listen." He didn't turn, his gaze fixed on the rain-streaked window, but she saw his hands clench into fists at his sides. She took that as permission to continue. Everything Veronica said was true, she confessed, the words tasting like ash. The methods, the deception, it was all my design. But her reasons, her narrative, that was the lie. She took another step closer, her heart pounding. "I saw you dying, Ethan. Not your body, but your soul. I saw you turning into a ghost, an echo of the boy I raised. I tried to help the only way I knew how, with introductions and society functions, but it was like throwing pebbles at a fortress of ice. I couldn't reach you, and it was killing me." Her voice cracked with a sob she could no longer contain. "So I did something insane. I became a cleaner because I needed to find someone who wouldn't see the CEO, who wouldn't see the Martinez name. I needed to find someone who could see you." She was standing right behind him now, her words spilling out in a torrent of long-held guilt and love. "And I found her. I found a woman who draws sunflowers for stressed receptionists and shows kindness to people who are invisible. I found Chloe. My methods were wrong, Ethan, a terrible, unforgivable mistake. But my reasons were born from a mother's desperate love." She reached out a trembling hand, almost touching his shoulder before letting it fall. "I built this entire world for you, Ethan," she said, her voice dropping to its most vulnerable tremor. "This company, this building, this life, all of it. But I forgot to teach you that it's worthless without someone real to share it with. Chloe was real. What you felt for her was real. Don't let my mistake and your fear cost you the one person who saw you when you were invisible." Her words hung in the air, a final, desperate plea. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain and her own ragged breathing. Then, slowly, Ethan turned. His face was a landscape of pain, but through the anger and betrayal, a flicker of something else was fighting its way to the surface, understanding. Her raw, unvarnished confession had finally pierced his armor. He realized his feelings for Chloe had been born in their quiet rooftop conversations, in the honesty of her art, in the compassion of her eyes. Those feelings were his, independent of his mother's scheme. The context of their meeting was a lie, but the connection itself was the truest thing he had felt in years. He had let Veronica's venom and his own past trauma blind him to that truth. Without another word, he walked past his mother and out of the penthouse, his purpose clear. He found Chloe at her grandmother's small, tidy apartment. The air smelled of lavender and old books. She was packing a small box, her movements mechanical, her face pale and etched with a grief so profound it made his own heart ache. She looked up as he entered, her eyes filled with a weary mixture of surprise and pain. She expected an apology on his mother's behalf, or worse, a final formal severing of ties. Ethan crossed the room, stopping just before her, his own expression stripped of all pretense. "I'm not here to apologize for my mother," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "I'm here to apologize for me," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "I'm sorry for my cynical heart. I'm sorry that when I was shown something real, I let my past convince me it had to be fake. And I am so sorry that I doubted you even for a second." He reached out and gently took her hand, his touch sending a jolt of warmth through her. "My mother's plan was wrong, Chloe. But she was right about one thing. You saw me. When I couldn't even see myself, you saw me. That is a truth no lie can ever tarnish. Please, can we start over, just you and me? No secrets." Tears welled in Chloe's eyes, but this time they were not tears of humiliation or sorrow. They were tears of relief, of a heart finding its way back from a devastating blow. She saw in his eyes the man she had fallen in love with, the man who had shared his fears with her under the stars. She nodded, a watery smile breaking through her sadness. Their relationship began anew in that quiet, humble room, built not on a secret scheme but on a shared, hard-won honesty. In the weeks that followed, Veronica was quietly and decisively dismissed from the company, her ambition leaving her with nothing. True to his transformation, Ethan became a more empathetic and engaged leader. He and Chloe, now partners in life and in purpose, established a new philanthropic branch of the company. They called it the Baker Grant, a foundation funded by Martinez Global that provided full scholarships and living stipends for talented students who, like Chloe, had been forced to sacrifice their educational dreams for family emergencies. It was a way to turn the pain of their past into a future of opportunity for others, a testament to their shared values and a symbol of their new beginning. 2 years later, the grand ballroom of a downtown hotel was filled with applause. On stage, Ethan and Chloe, now married, presented the annual Baker Grant to a tearful young architecture student. Chloe's smile was radiant, her quiet strength now a confident guiding light. In the front row, Eleanor sat, her posture relaxed, her face alight with a joy that was deep and serene. She was no longer a steely CEO but a proud grandmother, holding her infant grandson who was wrapped in a soft blue blanket. Her gaze met Chloe's across the crowded room, and the two women shared a smile of profound, unconditional love. The fractured family had not just been mended, it had been reborn, stronger and more real than ever before. If you liked this video, please subscribe and leave a like. And if you watched until the very end, let us know by commenting with the keyword sunflowers so we know you made it. Thank you for being part of our story.